On this episode of FieldLink, we head west to California to gain valuable insight about the importance of corn production and how that crop impacts dairy producers in the Golden State. Plus, we'll dive into some key production practices of raising almonds in the Valley of California. Plus, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss the latest commodity markets. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. And on this episode, we're going to head west to California. And joining us today on the FieldLink podcast is Hayden Costa. Hayden is a sales representative out of Hanford, California. Hayden, welcome to FieldLink.
Bill, how are you?
Hey, good, man. Good to have you here. How are things in Hanford today?
Going great. Everything's going good. Can't complain. The weather's been abnormally a little low, and I don't think nobody's complaining. We're used to that 110 degree weather for this stretch, and it's been below 100 up to 100. So, I mean, I don't think nobody's complaining right now.
That's a win for that part of the world, isn't it?
100%. Like I said, nobody's complaining. Everybody's happy right now.
Well, hey, for a lot of our listeners, they hear California, huge state. Tell us where Hanford's at, and tell us a little bit, Hayden, about the geography that you work in on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so Hanford is roughly 45 minutes south of Fresno. I mean, I bet you if you get a map and put your finger right dab in the middle, a little bit towards the south, that's where Hanford is. And honestly, I think Hanford is one of the most diverse areas in terms of crops. I mean, we got everything from corn, wheat, trees, pistachios, almonds, grapes, tomatoes, melons. I mean, cotton, the list goes on and on. I mean, I think we can probably sit here all day and go over just the varieties we have of the amount or the various amount of crops we have. It's insane once you get to it. But day-to-day basis, I mean, you're always jumping into different crops and everything's always changing. So it keeps you on your toes.
Definitely. Okay, Hayden, tell us a little bit about you. How'd you make your way to Helena?
So it's actually a funny story. I was sitting at junior college out here, and an internship job came across the board, and it was an internship for Agri-Intelligence, and I applied to that. I think it was roughly about 7 years ago. I did that for about 2 to 3 years, and then that's when I got the opportunity to jump over to the sales intern. And then I did that for a summer. And then a couple months after that came the sales trainee role. And I think we'll probably be I think this is my third season as an official sales rep. So Needless to say, I've kind of almost done it all,
Oh, that's awesome. And you, like a lot of Helena sales folks and Helena representatives, rather, get their start through those internship programs like that and follow your journey through Agri-Intelligence and other aspects, whether it be operations. And you landed your gig right now working in sales at Hanford.
100%. Yeah. It's almost like a pipeline, right? And even our interns that we have right now, we have 4 interns, and they're phenomenal. And same thing, it's just a pipeline to funnel you into a sales rep or whatever route you want to go. And if you don't like the sales rep, you go a different route, and it's a pipeline.
Sure. That's awesome. And the neat thing about that is you're learning all along the way. You're learning the business, aren't you?
100%. Yeah. And it's as you're that sales intern role, right? I mean, that you're checking the sales reps field, just giving them a second set of eyes, but in the same breath, you're talking to the sales reps saying, hey, I see this, yada, yada, yada. What are we going to do? And you tell them, okay, we're going to come in and do X, Y, Z. So almost when you start that sales trainee role, your wheels are already turning in your head. So you're not getting into something you have no clue about. It's something you've been talking to sales reps for the last couple summers, and you kind of already know what's going on. So it really helps with that process going into that next role.
That's awesome. Okay, so as we talked about in your geographies, just south of Fresno, California, and Hanford, in that region, you guys have a ton of crops, a tremendous amount of diversity, one of them being almonds. What's going on in the almond crop right now? It's kind of a critical time for almond producers, isn't it?
100%. So right now, it started about last week, maybe about 10, 14 days ago, we started seeing our first whole splits along the edges. Usually those first ones are blanks, which means like when you open that nut up, it's just basically a deflated nut. Once you see that, you're probably roughly 7 days out before your true nuts start splitting. And we're spraying roughly around that 5% whole split, once that whole splits, that's when it starts getting susceptible to your navel orange worm laying its eggs and then the worm penetrating that almond. So right now, I think the first set of nonpareils Monterey blocks are going to get sprayed this weekend. And then we'll start rolling into next week with those ones that are pushing a little later. And then your Independence variety, those ones are still a little tight, a little bit of splitting on your blank. So that one will probably be about 5-7 days after that. So it's funny you bring that up because we're hitting it right now. And looking at our notes compared to last year, we're roughly about 5-7 days ahead of where we were last year.
Okay. And is that, I guess, weather impacting that a little bit? You mentioned earlier that, we're not having the heat like we have. Is that kind of progressing the crop along a little quicker?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about that as a branch a couple of days ago and, just throwing ideas about why we're this far ahead. And that actually came up in conversation, right? These trees aren't stressed. They're not being as stressed as they were in past. So they're not shutting down when it gets 110 degrees. It's almost been in that perfect little state where they're progressing and progressing and progressing without getting stressed with the heat. So what we're kind of thinking is that happy medium of temperature we've been having, those trees have just been rolling. And they've just been going and going and going. And that puts us about, like I said, about 5-7 days ahead of where we were last year.
Wow. Okay. So for some of our listeners out there that aren't completely familiar with the production of almonds, you said whole splits happening right now. What kind of sprays are y'all spraying right now? And you mentioned a few diseases and insects that you're trying to, I guess, combat.
Yeah. So to combat that navel orange worm, we're using products like Altacore, Intrepid, Spearlep, stuff like that to really just get us that residual to get us to the next whole split or the next spray. So we usually spray and then come back in a couple weeks, spray again. And then by that time, usually your nonpareils, which is your first variety, is going to get shook. And then we'll do another spray, just spraying what we call the pollinators, which are your Monterey's and the nonpareil Monterey blocks. Some other things we're looking out for right now. Rust for sure. Rust will start blowing up. We may throw a fungicide in for that. Mites are really bad this year for whatever reason. And it's almost like almost every single block you have, you're starting to find mites. So we'll probably throw miticides in with that first spray just to give us that legs, to give us that 2 weeks of residual. And then outside of that, we're using products like Utilize PK to really help with what we call whole rot. And that's really when that nut sticks to the tree and doesn't want to get shooken off. So mainly right now, right, our first concern is navel orange worm. After that, probably be mites. And then if you have any diseases like rust or shot hole, we'll treat that at the time while the rig's going through the field.
Hayden, just listening to you talk about the multiple applications, correct? I mean, on average, again, for our listeners that don't really know how almonds are actually produced, how many applications are you looking at on an average season?
So we start off the year with fungicides when we go to bloom. Usually we'll do two sprays during bloom, might do a third depending on what the history of that field is. If there's a bad disease history there, we might come in with a third one 5 weeks post petal fall. And then we're keeping an eye on stink bug and leaf-footed plant bug. If that's a flare-up, we'll do a spray in between. And usually your fungicide sprays will start around Valentine's Day, give or take a couple weeks. So call it first, second week of March, you're done with that. Keeping our eyes on stink bug, plant bug. And the period going up from that to about end of April, there we'll do a May spray, which is really just hitting all that NOW or your navel orange worm at that time. And then same thing, keeping an eye on stink bug, plant bug. Those are the two big bugs we're really keeping an eye on. And then that'll get you to your May or your whole split spray, which is roughly right about now. And then if you have a disease like rust or shot hole pop up within that period, you'll come in again. So if you number it up, probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is probably roughly standard, barring you don't have anything random kind of come up throughout the season.
Right. Wow. That's far more than the average, I guess, corn, soybean, cotton producer will do on average.
100%. Yeah. It's like I said, it's one of those things. That's why we're always in those fields, always keeping an eye on things because it can always change in a blink of an eye. And you would rather be playing offense than playing defense,
That's a good point. Being very offensive. As a part of, some of those sprays, especially now as you're getting a whole split, what are you guys recommended? I guess what's your go-to adjuvant for some of those applications?
Dynamic all day. I mean, it's kind of drilled 6.4 ounces of dynamic per 100,
And what are producers seeing? That's certainly a great standard, been in our portfolio for a long time. But, are you seeing some growers maybe not using dynamic, and how's that impacting their performance?
Yeah, some, when you get into the cost of things, sometimes we're trying to bring the cost of things down. And in that case, we may change it up a little bit.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, right, we're coming through the field with the rig. Our main concern is NOW, or navel orange worm. And what we're trying to do is, hey, we're bringing this rig through the field. We got to make this count. You know what I mean? We got to, whatever we can do to get the best out of this spray is what we got to do, because you only got one shot at this. Once you have damage from navel orange worm, it's not nothing you can go and say, oh, let's fix this. Like, once the damage is done, the damage is done. So it's what can we add to help benefit the spray? You know what I mean?
Right, right. Yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense because, you're spending a fair amount on the active ingredient anyhow. Adding a product like Dynamic just kind of takes it over the top, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah. And then, like I said, at the end of the day, all we can do is make that spray even better. And so if you're talking getting better coverage and getting a better kill, by all means, it's like we got to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so almonds certainly an important part of agriculture in your area, but you're also dealing with a lot of dairies also in your specific part of California. Tell us a little bit about some of the dairies that you get to work with.
Yeah, so it's funny, like you said, California is super, super diverse, and I think sometimes the dairy industry is a little looked over. I mean, when you break it down in California, if you look it up on Google, top 5 dairy counties in the United States, 5 of them, the top 5 are right here, right? We got Kern, we got Kings, Tulare, Stanislaus, and I believe it's Merced County. So dairying is super, super huge here. With the dairies comes a lot of cows. All those cows have to get fed with quality feed, and that's where we have a lot of corn and wheat acres.
Awesome. So you're dealing with a lot of production in corn and wheat in that geography, but obviously with corn and wheat comes some of the challenges that you have to deal with in California that a lot of other corn and wheat growers don't always deal with, and a lot of that's water, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. Once you get into the Kings, Tulare County, especially south of Hanford, going into that tipped in Tulare Corcoran area, we're having a lot of water problems, and it's what we call white ground, where they can't pump enough out of their ground to support all the acres they have, and they don't have access to surface water. So we're having acres that are, or dairies that are 1,200 acres, maybe 2,000 acres, and they don't have the water to grow all that. So instead of growing 1,200 acres, we're growing 200 or 300 acres of corn, right? And that's just part of the problems we're dealing with. And on top of that, right, we have quality of soil may not be the best over there. And add on top of that, you're not having enough water. So we may be making situations where, hey, we can grow 200 acres of corn, right, with the water we have. But if we change it to sorghum, we can grow now 400 acres of sorghum with the water we have. Thus, you're getting more feed in the silage pile for the cows that you feed, therefore making milk. And then, it makes its full circle.
Right. So, what are you doing, Hayden, you and your team at your branch to help those corn growers, sorghum growers, maybe, I don't want to say necessarily alter their soil, but maybe first identify what the problem is? What types of tools do you use in your toolbox?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our soils they're a little rough, high salts, and it's patchy, right? So that's where for us high ground comes in, right? We have the ability to go over with the device, and basically I call it scanning the field, and you're able to get a full map of that field, right? And instead of treating it with maybe a ton or two of JIP blanket application, we're able to go, hey, we can use the amount of 1 ton per acre
Mhm.
total, but instead of doing the blanket, we're going to put 2 tons in the bad spot. We're going to put 1 ton or 1,000 pounds in the okay spot, and in the good spots, we only got to put 500 pounds. So you're using the same amount of gyp you were going to use before, but now you're putting the majority of that gypsum or sulfur or whatever it is, lime, in the bad spots. Thus, you're fixing your problem a little quicker, and you're putting the stuff you need in the correct spots.
Yeah, and that's of course high ground being a part of the agri-intelligence portfolio. Most of your growers really adapting to that type of platform.
It's coming around 100%. It's coming around. I mean, thing is a lot of guys don't never heard of it, right? Everybody's so used to doing the blanket application, and once they hear about it, test it out on a couple fields, and then you start seeing that progress, and it's like, I never knew I had this really bad spot, and then I never knew I can just hit that spot really hard and hit the good spots less. And then once you start seeing it start turn around, turn around, turn around, that's when guys are really like, wow, well, where has this been? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, definitely a great tool and toolbox for producers in your area and really producers from across the country. Let's talk a little bit, kind of staying on that tone of water management. We talked a little bit about resgenics earlier, and that's also another tool in your toolbox, isn't it?
Oh yeah, resgenics it's grown a lot, right? And our soils tend to sometimes we may have super high calcium, or in a lot of cases it's really high salts. And as a result of that, especially in the trees, we see it in the corn. In the trees, we start seeing a lot of ponding, or a lot of just where the drip line is, that water is just not going down. And kind of what happens is because that water doesn't go down with the heat we have in the trees, it makes an environment for fungal diseases, right? Your rusts, your alternarias, and it just creates that environment. So to fix that, what we've been doing is we'll run like resgenics or a liquid chisel or something like that just to get that water down. And really, it helps out with so many different things. You're getting the water where it needs to be. You're having less fungal disease problems in the trees. When you get to the corn, same thing, right? We have a lot of salt problems. A lot of these dairies use manure water, and with that comes high salts. Same
Mm-hmm.
problem. And what we're doing is we're running that resgenics. We're going to water run it. We're going to shank it in. And what we're seeing is that corn, it turns into a tabletop. Because what happens is a lot of our corn, we're starting to get a little more drip corn, but a lot of our corn's all flood irrigated. So what happens is when that water slides across and it gets to the end and that water is not able to go down, your corn gets to that end and it wants to just go down. And it doesn't look like a table. So once you get to that last 3/4, it drops. Well, when you add that resgenics in, it almost really helps that water suck down at the end of the check. And then now that corn is just tabletop all the way across. So it's
Wow.
a phenomenal tool for us to use in the situation we're in.
Wow. And application, any issues using resgenics from your side?
No, I mean, we've done everything from spraying it on pre-plant. We've shanked it in. We've water ran it. We've had really good results. The only thing is don't mix it with Can 17.
There are a few watch outs, right? You just
Yeah,
got
yeah,
to,
yeah. Don't mix it with Can 17. We learned that one the hard way.
well, certainly got a lot of growers using resgenics across the country, and application sure is, it's a lot different than some of the older technology for sure.
It's so easy. You can blend it with, and when we go into the trees, right, we're making blends with UM32, KTS, some micros, some humic. All you got to do is just add it in that tank and it's a one shop stop. You know what I mean? Do it all
Mhm.
at one time compared to some of the older stuff where it had to be done separately because it's a little thicker and it kind of was a bear to deal with. But this Resgenics, it's super easy to use and the results are there.
Hayden, what are some of the challenges that growers, especially the dairy guys, what are some, we talked about the soil. What are some other challenges that they're facing today in your market?
Yeah, I mean, besides the water, a lot of it comes down to the heat. Like I said, we're abnormally a little cooler than we usually been. In the
Mhm.
last couple of years, we've had days where it's weeks and weeks and weeks of straight 105, 115 days, and it really takes a toll on that corn. Starting out with emergence, we have a couple ways guys plant, right? We have a lot of, I would say probably majority of our stuff is the classic, beds, plant the corn on beds. We have a lot of flats, a lot of strip till, a lot of no till. Well, with that heat, we start seeing some emergent problems. We saw a little bit of it this year, nothing too crazy, but what happened is once that corn pops out of the ground in the spiking stage, that heat just takes its toll on it and just fries the spike. And
Oh,
so it may grow out of it. A lot of times, if it hits it on that early stage, it just doesn't grow out of it. So thus, that's going into a poor stand. With the heat, usually on our first irrigation, if it's really hot, we'll have to put water on it early because we already have stress happening. And that's the one thing you don't want to do with that corn is stress it out super early, because what a lot of people don't know is once that corn hits about knee high, which is roughly our first irrigation timing, the girth of the corn and how many kernels are around it is determined at that stage. And
sure.
as you get that heat hitting, you don't want to stress it. You want to get that water on. And as you move a little forward, once it hits chest high, that corn already determined how long the cob's going to be. And so, like I said, it just comes down to playing that game with getting water on it probably a little sooner than it needs, especially with this heat. And then as we roll into pollination, we saw it last year when we had a lot of 110, 115 days. We had corn that was just super stressed out. And it happened in a couple blocks where maybe 25 to 30% of the kernels actually got pollinated.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's just things like that, right? We're battling water, we're battling the quality of water, we're battling the quality of the soil with the heat.
With all of that, I guess those environmental challenges, what are some tools and techniques and things that you're doing to maybe help offset some of that stress for corn during those stages?
Yeah, first one that comes to mind is Megafull. When we do miticide applications, that's usually when we're throwing in that megafull. Some guys will come in with drop nozzles a little earlier and we'll get that megafull on with the miticide. A lot of guys, they don't put their borders down, so they'll keep them up. And a lot of my applications done with helicopter. When it's applied by helicopter, usually that miticide timing, depending if you have a flare up or not, it times out pretty close to tasseling, a couple, maybe like 7 to 10 days before. So what that kind of allows us to do is, hey, we're going to come in with that miticide with the helicopter. We throw in that megafull there to get us that 14, 21, maybe 28 days of that abiotic stress relief, and it works wonders. Because what my goal is you're working all year long to get to that end, right? And the most critical point of that corn season is that tasseling stage. And it just happens to be in the middle of July for most growers. And so what can we do to make that most stressful process of corn, make it the less stressed? So that's when we come in, add the megafull, and it's phenomenal when it comes to abiotic stress relievers. So your heat, the days of how long it's going to be hot, it helps that plant not shut down, and thus you're getting phenomenal pollination and getting the most kernels pollinated, and all those kernels on the ears puts on tons.
Wow. Yeah. Kernels, tons, and then weight inside them. So having that megafull there, from what I'm hearing you say, is just relieving that stress and letting it do its thing, right?
Yeah, because the heat's always going to be there, right? We can't take the heat away. What we can do is change things to make it less stressed during that heat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just give it a little breather, if you will. And that's what megafull certainly does. It gives it a little room to wiggle there. Hayden, with all of the dairy manure and some of the water that's being utilized and repurposed on the fields, you guys get some environmental challenges there. But what are some techniques that you guys use to maybe balance that out? What kind of products are you using there to help that along?
Yeah, first one that comes to mind is Standout. I have a couple dairy guys that we run manure water and we don't put fertilizer on. But what we've been doing is we'll water run that Standout with the manure water. And what we're trying to do is really just speed up that process to make that manure more plant available and get it into the plant. And thus you're putting those pounds in the ground with the manure water and getting that stuff plant available ASAP, and thus seeing that result through the corn. Another tool that we use is Hydrohume. Hydrohume is phenomenal on dairy ground, water running that or side dressing that. And what we get is that dirt, or the soil, is able to hold more of that nitrogen, thus being more plant available, getting those pounds in the ground, pounds to the corn.
Well, you're putting that's a pretty powerful 1-2 punch there with really a biological type product as well as a humic. Tell us a little bit how that biological activity from Standout kind of impacts that crop from your perspective.
Yeah. So what we've kind of been seeing, especially with some of the trials we ran in the last couple of years, our go-to 1-2 punch, especially for me, is that Standout with the humic. And like I said, a couple different situations, but we'll usually side dress that before the first irrigation. And what we've been seeing is, we're not putting on any extra fertilizer in some cases, just the humic and the Standout. And we're seeing a ton or two increase by doing nothing else different, instead of just adding that humic with the Standout. So the results are there. And just finding that 1-2 punch, it's been a phenomenal thing for me the last couple of years.
Certainly making, the fertility more available and more active for that crop at that time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you get to this dairy ground thing, especially in California, a lot of that manure is repurposed and repurposed and repurposed. And it's the best tool we have, right? It's a byproduct of the cows. It's something we can reuse. It's something, but you sit here and think, how can we make that a little better? And once you start adding that humic and Standout, you just sit back and you're like, whoa. When you start adding in 2 little products and you start getting a little more tons by doing nothing different, that's when you really see the full effect. And you sit back and you're just like, wow, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Certainly a lot of science behind it. And, coupling that with, like you mentioned earlier, a high ground program, you can really identify what that crop's probably going to need based on that fertility profile.
Yeah. Like I said, we have so many tools in our tool belt, and it's just figuring out what tool you need to use in what situation. And at the end of the day, it's crazy to think about what we can do right now to help these growers get to that in finish line.
Hayden, as a part of the Almond Wise program, we really like to keep growers educated and abreast with the latest news and agronomic information around, news around agronomy and products that can help them produce a more profitable crop. That's really the basis of Almond Wise. What are some things that you're seeing in your market that growers need to be paid attention through?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the new red blotch disease. It started a couple hours north of us, and what they started seeing last year was this new disease. The name's in it, red blotch. You're going to start off seeing a little red blotch on the leaves. And what they saw last year up north was it was just defoliating trees. You move forward to this year, we're starting to see it. I think everybody in Helena Hanford has started seeing it in their blocks over the last 2 weeks. Nothing crazy has been popping up. It just kind of pops up. Trees aren't defoliating. Nothing crazy is going on. And what kind of we're thinking and wondering is because we've had such a mild summer to start off with, maybe those trees aren't as stressed, and that's why we're not seeing that defoliation that the guys up north have been seeing. And reading up on the literature and all the data and everything, what we're getting told is to combat this disease, you have to do it months and months in advance. What's there is already there, and it's stuff that needs to get sprayed when we do the bloom timing plus a 5-week post petal fall spray. So, just a new disease popping up, and it's something that we're all learning and figure out ways to combat it. And it sounds like it's something we're going to start doing next year in that bloom spray timing.
Wow. And I think that's a really important point. Mother Nature's always changing things on us, and we're always learning. And there's a great example why a program like Almond Wise is so important to growers that are raising almonds, so they can keep abreast of what's happening agronomically. And it helps you as a sales representative, agronomist to, help combat some of these challenges.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because we have so many commodities in California, and it seems like it's never changing, right? I mean, you think you almost have it all kind of figured out. You got your thing going, and then boom, you get hit with this new disease. And so all we can do is read up on it, read the literature, and figure out how to stay ahead of it. Because at the end of the day, it's not fun playing defense. It's a little more fun playing offense. So if we can stay ahead of it, figure out what we need to do next year to fix this problem so it doesn't turn into a whole disaster like we've seen up north with trees defoliating. If we can stay ahead of that and know what we need to do when we need to do it, I think everybody's going to be in a good spot next year.
Hayden Costa, thanks for keeping us on the offensive side of the ball.
I like it.
Agriculture is concerned. You're definitely Helena's quarterback out there in Hanford. Appreciate you joining us here on this episode of FieldLink.
Appreciate it, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jody Lawrence flying solo today for Helena's FieldLink podcast. Bill Smith had some duties outside the office today, so I'm going to run through everything that's going on. Unfortunately, it's a tale of good news, bad news. The good news is obviously the crop is in really good shape for a majority of the Corn Belt, and prices are beginning to reflect that. Once you get past the 4th of July break, it always seems to be a critical inflection point for the market just because we've got the corn pollination forecast for the next 2 weeks. And without any heat stress and plenty of moisture in just about all the states, the corn crop looks really, really good. And today's new ratings confirm that. It's at 74% good to excellent compared to 73% last week and 68% last year. And remember, last year's crop at one point was thought to be 180 plus yield. Ended up being a little bit smaller, still a big number at 178. But with these high crop conditions, it's hard to make a bullish argument that this crop is going to be too far off trend, if not exceeded a little bit. Probably the biggest thing on exceeding trend is just the amount of acres, that 96 million acres with the extra 5 million. Those extra acres are mainly rotation acres, and they're not necessarily the best and highest yielding corn acres. So when you mix it all in, it will be interesting to see next month in the USDA August report what they give us for initial yield estimates. My guess is they won't stray too far from trendline yield at 182, simply because they know they've got a lot of time, and obviously August and September weather is also critical. The one thing that I do notice on the crop condition is that 86% of Iowa's corn is considered good to excellent. And Illinois' crop continues to improve. It's at 68, not as high because you've got a lot of moisture in the south that affected the initial stages of planting and growing. The central area and the northern areas have gotten a little bit dry lately, but their soil's so deep it's holding enough water to make it through the rain that's expected by the end of the week. So you start looking at the really big production states that there just aren't any problems. The trouble areas, when you go start looking county by county or even state by state, is that Ohio is still struggling at 57% just due to the excessive moisture. So we'll see how the USDA deals with that as we move forward, because it's not 100% Goldilocks crop, but the big producing areas do look like they're going to have bin buster and potential record yields. On the bean side of it, the bean condition stayed the same at 66% good to excellent, a little bit lower than last year, but the same as last week. So the bean conditions also holding steady. And we know that corn is made in July and beans are made in August. So there's still a weather window that you have to look at in beans. The big news over the fourth holiday was that last week's optimism about a trade deal with China turned out to be fake news, and last week's rally completely disappeared in today's trade, simply because the weather forecasts are good for pollination, and without a trade deal with China, it really creates a problem of not being able to get rid of all these extra bushels fast enough with the world's largest consumer. Another hook in this whole thing is that July 9th trade date is coming forward, or the tariff date is coming up in a couple days. It looks like most of those have been extended to August 1st. So we've got 16 or 17 countries that the Trump trade team are trying to get trade deals done within the next 3 weeks. And the sheer volume of that has led everyone to believe that China is going to be the last trade deal. It's going to take quite a while to get there. But if we can get one done with Japan and South Korea, who are major U.S. corn importers, and then with India, those three would certainly be very helpful. We hope the tariffs don't come on, obviously, because we don't need to lose any more market share because of the trade battle. Other than that, no trade deals and good U.S. pollination weather. You know where the crops are. We're hovering just above the contract lows for December corn and November beans, which are going to need some bullish information coming up here pretty quickly to be able to get in any sort of decent rally. That's really all we've got for today. Pollination next.
Plus, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss the latest commodity markets. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink.
Talk to your crop insurance agent so that you fully understand where you are with your revenue protection, what is going to be paid or what currently is going to be paid, using your APH, and then using what your estimation is of where your current yield is, because you got some financial decisions to make. That of if you've got a great crop, it's a really good time to talk to your agronomist, and after you talk to your crop insurance agent, to find those products that are going to help you get that extra yield to make up for the revenue shortfall from the lower prices. So be in touch with your Helena representative, be in touch with your insurance agent, and we will keep an eye on everything and talk to you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts or subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode.